right, welcome everyone to this, the final panel session of the Good Food Conference 2021. I'm your moderator for this panel on contract manufacturing opportunities. We're looking forward to an exciting conversation for you for the rest of this hour. We're going to begin by going over a few housekeeping items, and then we'll meet our panelists. The first thing to note for each of our participants is that we encourage you to actively engage and practice active listening. Make sure that you're engaging in the chat if you have questions or you'd like to answer other people's questions. It's part of what makes this conference fun and useful for everyone. So please feel free to do that. We ask, of course, as you do that, as we've asked throughout the conference, to do so in a courteous way and make sure you're respecting the ideas and contributions of others. Finally, please feel free to participate via asking questions in the Q&A. We're looking forward to addressing as many of those questions as we have time for towards the end of today's session. If you have any technical difficulties during our session, please feel free to exit the session, go to the Expo tab and visit our help desk to make sure that they can help you and make sure to get everything fixed so you can experience everything like it's supposed to be experienced. Next, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be framing up for the conversation today. What we're looking to discuss is contract manufacturing. So I first want to make sure we're on the same page with that. Contract manufacturing is outsourcing all or some of your manufacturing process to someone else who specializes in doing that sort of thing. So it's an alternative to self-operated manufacturing, or a different way of thinking about it, alternative to vertical integration. There's a lot of different terms that are often used for contract manufacturers. You might hear things like co-man or CMO or CDMO, co-packer, toller, processor. These terms are often used interchangeably, but they are usually denoting some sort of specific part of the process or specific service that's being offered. So we probably will use some of those terms interchangeably during this session. You'll probably hear these terms used interchangeably in the chat, but I will ask our panelists and folks who are contributing on the chat to note if their comments are unique or specific to a certain subset of those types of contract manufacturers. Contract manufacturing is incredibly important. We're excited to talk about it because we know that having ample contract manufacturing capacity makes it easier for all companies, large and small, but especially small, the startups, to scale and to overcome the barriers to entry for new markets. Not every company wants to be in the manufacturing business, but that's a problem when you're in the food industry because food is very much a volume-driven manufacturing business and is almost in some ways the largest producer or manufacturing type of industry on the planet, one of the largest certainly. And so having a lot of contract capacity available at various scales, pilot scale, demo scale, all the way up through commercial scales is incredibly important and makes it a lot easier and faster for different participants and brands to scale in this space by essentially turning what would ordinarily be a capital expenditure, maybe spending a bunch of money to build a pilot plant facility into an operating expense. So particularly for early stage startups, I'm sure a lot of other things you'd rather do with $25 million in early stage capital than build a pilot plant, pilot facility. So it's incredibly important, and we're really excited to talk about some of the current opportunities and challenges in contract manufacturing with our panelists, learn from their experiences about how we can make sure that contract manufacturing is a mutually beneficial relationship between the brands who work with contractors and the contract manufacturers themselves, and talk about some of the ways in which this space could be helped along, whether that's increased investment, certain types of innovation, certain regulatory changes, or other things. So with that, let's meet our panelists. I'm really excited to introduce everyone who is joining us today to share their insights. We're going to start in Germany, actually, with Nicole Johnson-Hoffman. So for each of our panelists, I'll just give a quick bite about their background, and then I'll ask each of them to jump in and talk a little bit more about their experience and what they're currently up to at their current organization. So starting with Nicole. Nicole works at OSI. She's the Managing Director of Further Processed Foods, the Senior Vice President of the Global McDonald's Business Unit, and the Chief Sustainability Officer. So it doesn't seem like she has a lot of extra free time on her hands. We're grateful that she's chosen to spend some of it with us. OSI, of course, is well known for partnering with Impossible Foods as a contract manufacturer. And Nicole can talk a lot about what it's like to integrate plant-based meat production as a very highly scaled and highly successful animal protein processor. So Nicole, please feel free to give us a little bit more on your background and what you do at OSI.
Great. Thanks very much, Zach, for that introduction. And also thanks very much for the invitation to join you today. It's a pleasure for me to be with you, in part because when OSI was first starting on our partnership with some of our customers in the plant-based foods business, we turned to GFI for some guidance, and GFI and Zach helped us prepare to be a great partner in this space. So I'm happy to be here and talk a little bit about what that's like. OSI is a company that's over 100 years old. We're a food processor with locations all over the world, and we work with the world's biggest brands. Most of our business started partnering with global QSRs, and now we work with the QSR and the retail sector all over the world. And my job in particular is to run our further processed foods business here in continental Europe. This is where I have a business that has 9 factories here across Europe and is based in Munich. So I'm very pleased to be with you today.
Thank you, Nicole, for being here. And just a note, yeah, it's 8:30 p.m. In Germany, but that's not actually, I don't believe, the current record. So Excel Lin is our next panelist. I'd like to have introduce himself, based, I believe, in Singapore. And if you're currently there, it should be about 2:30 a.m. So we're really excited and appreciative to have you as well. Excel is the founder, president, and CEO of Esco Aster, which is a contract development and manufacturing organization, which you might see referred to by the acronym CDMO in the chat. It's based in Singapore, and Esco Aster recently announced some very exciting news that they're the Singapore Food Agency approved them to have the first contract development and manufacturing facility accredited for cultivated meat production, first in the world. So very, very exciting developments there. Excel will be talking about. So Excel, please feel free to provide a little bit more on your background and tell us what you're doing with Esco Aster.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me as part of this great conference. So yeah, my name is Excel Lin. So I'm the founder, president, and CEO for Esco Aster. We are the first and best in class cultivated meat CDMO. So we are doing contract development, actually starting from very early stage of cell line creation, all the way down to media development, process development, and then leading to contract manufacturing for cell cultured cultivated meat. So we have been extremely busy with our various clients and collaborators around the world, and yeah, we are very busy scaling up as well for our different collaborators and partners. So very happy to be here to share our experience and our thoughts on cultivated meat.
Great, thank you so much. Very excited to have you on this panel. Next, we're going to jump to Joe. Joe Ertman is joining us from Southern California, where he's the founder and president of Real Vision Foods, a plant-based food manufacturer. Joe brings a lot of experience in the food business, including many years as a contract manufacturer. So Joe, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about your background and what's keeping you busy at Real Vision.
That could be an understatement of a question. Welcome to everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to visit and share a little bit of my world. I'm certainly learning more acronyms as I go along, and CDMO is probably something that fits my my scope of work as well, because we do a fair amount of development with primarily contract manufacturing as our business scope. My background is littered with large CPG experience at General Mills and Pepsi. Also was a franchisee in the QSR industry for a period of time as well, with about 100 stores here in the U.S. So my current role is president of Real Vision, in which we provide infrastructure and manufacturing capabilities in the non-dairy fermentation arena, meat analog, as well as other plant-based healthy snacks. So we have a very large cross-section of capabilities, and we really provide the pipe to the first stage, I think, of meaningful scale capabilities and application and unit costing for some of the novel technologies that are coming to market around the plant-based space. So glad to be here and look forward to helping any way I can.
Thank you, Joe. Now we'll jump to Texas, where we are joined by Mark Warner. So Mark is a longtime veteran of the biofuels space, was a chief engineering officer at Impossible Foods before leaving to start his own consulting firm that focuses on fermentation, scale up engineering, and all kinds of things that Mark will tell you more about. I do in particular want to recognize that Mark's been a huge asset to GFI and understanding the fermentation space and fermentation CMO space in particular. And I also want to give a plug for Mark's book, the Industrial Biotechnology Commercialization Handbook, which has been incredibly useful for, I know, multiple people who are learning about this space for the first time or just looking to expand their existing knowledge. So Mark, please let us know what you're up to and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, thank you very much. Like everyone here, if you're in this space right now and not crazy busy or you're not paying attention, it's a great time to be doing it. Chemical engineer by background, my expertise is really scale up and commercialization of first of a kind biotechnology from bench all the way to commercial scale. I've had the opportunity to build and operate multiple commercial scale fermentation facilities, and that's really my passion these days, is working on especially the precision fermentation, bringing it to a size and scale to meet the economics we need to move the industry along. There's a lot of great technologies out there. We just need to get them all making more product, and at a price point they get wider acceptance. And that's a lot of my focus. And although I help build facilities, contract manufacturing, I agree, is a great way, especially in the early days, to not spend capital you don't otherwise need to focus on.
Great, thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Finally, we're joined by Dror Balshine from just outside of Toronto. Dror is the founder and president of Cuisine, which is a plant-based meat company that does contract manufacturing. They have their own brands and they're in private labeling, so quite a few different business lines. And they've been operating since 1980, so over 40 years of experience making meat alternatives. So Dror, please tell us a little bit about your background and yeah, what you're currently focused on at Cuisine.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah, we're right now focused on growing the brand mostly, but we are involved a lot with private label. In the past, we've done quite a bit of contract manufacturing as well. It's an exciting time to be in the plant-based area. You know, the growth CAGR year over year is really exceptional. The market acceptance is growing, and I think we're just scratching the surface. In terms of capabilities, you know, we're a GFSI certified quality plant. We've got all the certifications for manufacturing, and you know, manufacturing is our passion. We live it every day, and we enjoy having people try products we make. And it's a pleasure to be here. And Zach and I have been talking for many years. And thanks for including us in this conference.
Absolutely. We're glad you're here along with everyone else. So let's jump into some questions. I'm going to start. This first question is directed to Mark from your consulting background, just working with a variety of different startups. But I do want to open it up after Mark responds to any of our panelists who want to jump in, since I'm guessing a lot of them would have opinions on this. So the question is, how would you recommend companies, alternative protein startups, make their decision about whether to go down the route of self-operated manufacturing capacity or working with a contract manufacturer? What are some of the key decision factors that they should consider when looking to choose that fork in the path?
You know, probably the hardest thing, and I've been at many companies faced with this, and it's hard for a lot of novel startups who are used to inventing everything themselves and believing they need to do it themselves to understand they're probably not going to be very good at manufacturing. Manufacturing is very different than research. Research is innovating and doing things different every day and growing. Manufacturing is about cost reduction, consistency. Neither is good or bad, right or wrong, but they're very different skill sets. And I found entities that are really good at R&D really don't understand what it takes to do manufacturing. So the first thing you have to decide is, if you're going to do manufacturing, are you really committed to do it? And the second thing that I find interesting, having been involved in a couple startups that did build commercial facilities, the organization will change. The day you build a manufacturing facility, that's your revenue. It's the bulk of your people. what the startup culture was 4 or 5 years ago will change dramatically. And again, not that it's good or bad, but I find people underestimating how hard it is if they've never done it to run a manufacturing facility successfully. So.
Zach, I'd like to add a little bit to that, to echo what Mark is reinforcing, particularly now, and I think it's been going on for probably 10 to 15 years, is the labor and skill pool has become a significant challenge to the industry. And as these people are retiring, the pool of really technically skilled people that are necessary to operate some of these systems is it's just not there. And so it adds a level of complexity and difficulty to execution that I think Mark is referring to.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to jump in on this question? Choosing between how startups should think about choosing between contract manufacturing versus operating their own capacity?
I think I'll just interject and say, you know, when we work with partners who have tried to do self-manufacturing for some period of time, in some ways it helps them because it informs them about what they're going to now ask their partner to take over for them. And so if you have the capabilities and you have the cash to run a small scale operation for a time, it can teach you about your product and about your process, things that maybe, you know, you'll find quite helpful as you manage your partner in the future. So so there's a benefit there, but I think what Mark said is really correct. Once you put down bricks and mortar, you know, this is really a hard thing to change. And a lot of these organizations, a lot of these startups are changing every day. And they don't want to lock into one vision of their business or one process or one plan for production. They need some flexibility for their future, and a co-man can provide that.
And she made me think of one quote I have that none of my startups like to hear, but it's true. I say, building a plant is kind of like getting a puppy. It's not a short-term decision. It's not something you do for a year or two. You're going to have to run it for 10, 15 years. So I would agree with that. Yeah,
actually, if I could just share some thoughts. On the cultivated meat space, however, I think because the scales we're at are really not as large, maybe in the really in the QSR world or even the fermentation world, right? And what we see at least is that there are many different considerations, and it goes back to the same age-old question of chicken and egg, right, in a way. So, you know, on one hand, a lot of the cultivated meat companies need certain amount of products to get more investment dollars. So, you know, we see that actually there is then a role actually, especially in the cultivated meat space, because similarly, of course, the skilled force that is needed to run a cultivated meat manufacturing or basically cell culture, right, is actually quite large, right? I guess in a way, a lot of people come from the stem cell industry or cell therapy in that sense. So we don't have such constraints in that sense. And of course, we have a lot of people from biotech industry, right, that are very familiar of doing CHO cells, right? For instance, at the end of the day, the root of everything is still cell culture, right? Whether we are doing it for biologics or in this case for human consumption, right? So there are other considerations beyond actually all of the great points that are shared, and some of it also relates to investment milestones, right? You need sufficient products out there in order to unlock further funding, right? For a lot of these startups. So there are other investment depending on the number, which round you're at, of course, but there are other considerations as well to consider a contract manufacturing partner. And then there are a lot of people actually that have patents on cell lines, but don't know how to do process development, right? So they are at a very, very upstream stage of the research, right? In which they actually do need someone who even don't even talk about manufacturing the cells for food product, but really who just need bioengineering help and bioprocess help to help them develop a linearly scalable process at a highest yield and affordable cost.
I would just like to add that I think that having your own manufacturing facility is unideal, but often when you're starting a business, you have to make any strategic decisions, and you have limited resources. And I would just try and focus on what you're good at. I think that really, focus. Everyone always says, start a business and be successful, you have to focus. So you need to either have someone or bring in an expert in manufacturing, whether they're an internal person or an external. So I really highly recommend that this is a strategic decision, and like the puppy story, it's not short term.
Absolutely. Either way, whether you're working with an external contracts manufacturer or internal, it is a long-term relationship, to be sure.
Yeah, and it's great if you can manufacture, but it does take a lot of resources and attention. And I think what Mark said really resonated with me.
Yep, absolutely. You're fully in the manufacturing business. Well, I want to drill down a little bit with you, Excel, to talk specifically about the work that you're going to be doing, which is tremendously exciting, and really just understand how you see this space evolving, since you're the first or among the first in the world to have this status, being able to do CDMO work for cultivated meat. How do you see the landscape evolving over the next 5 years? Do you see large scales ahead? Do you think most startups are going to remain vertically integrated? What's, from your viewpoint, what's next in this very, very nascent category?
Yeah, actually, I have a lot to share on this, right? I think, one of the things that has been always talked about, maybe to start off with, the more it'll be to borrow a parallel, I guess, in terms of the biotech industry, right? Actually, and this will make more sense, right? But our first biologic product was actually made by Genentech, right? This is on a CHO cell, Chinese hamster ovary cell. This was in 1987, right? And at that point of time, they were just doing about 3 million cells per mil in a 7-day culture. This was for Activase, which is a tissue plasminogen activator for acute myocardial infarction. 34 years later now, this is where we are in 2021, we are now at 75 to 200 million cells per mil with perfusion systems over a 12-day culture. So, it has taken the biotech industry 34 years to get to this kind of cell density and yield and scale as well, right? Where it's common to scale up in 10 tons or 10,000 liter bioreactors or even larger, right? And so actually, basically, 5 years may not be enough to see very large scale, right? Realistically speaking, right? Just looking at how long it takes us in biotech, right? But what we definitely do see down the road in the next 5 years is actually we see more of the this convergence, I would say, of really the food ingredient in terms of the cultivated cell paste with the food product as well. And we are seeing more and more of these concepts being merged together and in a greater harmony, right? So the next 5 years down the road, we would see, I guess, smaller pilot factories of really bioreactor tanks really next to whether it's 3D printed or whether it's other kinds of formed actually food products with some with biodegradable scaffolds, some not, some in tissue bioreactors, and we are really going to be seeing this union of really cell-based food ingredient and food product really being married and merging together. And I think that will be quite a big shift in the industry because, generally, even up to today, still in the industry, it's always been ingredient people and food product people. And suddenly, actually, what we see is that a lot of people in this space are going to need to figure out actually how to culture cells, but to make it in a continuous manner, to continuously feed actually to make a final form food product. And there are many companies working in this space, and that's very exciting. So we are going to see more and more of these mini food plants in the next 5 to 10 years. And of course, to get it down to cost parity or even very large scale, this is something that will take 30 more years, right?
Yeah,
realistically speaking. Yeah.
Well, ultra long-term relationship then at that point. But yes, absolutely. We know it'll take time, but it is important to see. I wanted to offer this up as well to any of the other panelists. Any thoughts on what the future of specifically cultivated meat contract manufacturing capacity looks like? It's a wide open space, so pretty much anything you say, probably gonna be wrong, but anyone want to make any predictions or care to venture any guesses? All right, great. Well, Axel, looks like you have the final word on that topic. Let's move over. I'm going to start with Joe on this question, then throw it over to Dror. So for both of you, as our plant-based only contract manufacturers, you focus exclusively on plant-based products, especially plant-based meat, I believe, in both cases. So from your side of the table, what are you seeing? What are the trends? What are brands asking you about today? Are the common questions about equipment? Are the common questions about certain certifications or product attributes? Sort of what's been hot lately with both of your businesses? We'll start with you, Joe.
Well, I think what we've seen is really an explosion, which started with probably one of the first categories in the whole plant-based movement which was around milk. And of course, that's evolved beyond soy milk into nut milk, seed milks, grain milks. And there's a lot of notoriety, obviously, with some companies like Oatly and so forth. But that's now progressed into cheeses, the cheddars, the feta, the mozzarella. So you're seeing a lot of line extension and product form factor extension in that cheese alternative dairy application. It's a double-digit growing category, and it's certainly reflective with the kind of client flow and client interest that we see with both fermented and non-fermented cheese product applications. So we're also seeing a lot of interest around egg. There's been some good progress, and the technologies on the ingredient side have really moved along the continuum towards a closer alignment to a conventional egg, both from a nutritional perspective and also taste texture. So we're involved with some 2 different egg related companies. So the commodity expansion into plant-based is certainly well informed and continuing to grow. That's what I'm seeing.
I'll add to that. I think starting in 2018 with the go public of Beyond Meat, we've seen a huge explosion on items that are shipped frozen. People requesting items similar to the Beyond Meat style, like items that can be shipped fresh and then slacked off. Sausages and nuggets are really growing right now. The burger category may be a bit saturated, so less emphasis there in terms of interest, although obviously those are still staples. And there's a lot of interest around certifications and ingredients. Everyone wants to, pea is obviously a very important ingredient in the meat alternative space now. Soy still remains critical, but you do have a lot of people that want to avoid allergens. So we're seeing, certifications, allergens, and different formats with, I think, sausages and nuggets being the most hot areas right now.
I'm curious, as a kind of a follow-up to that, for both of you, are the line extensions being driven by a desire to just have more product faces on shelf? Is it being driven by a lot of R&D, new products being created and they're seeing demand in the marketplace? Or is it being driven actually by supply constraints, like maybe a plant-based milk company can't find any more plant-based milk contract manufacturing capacity, so they decide to go into plant-based butter or plant-based cheese, for example? Like, how much of it is supply driven versus demand driven, if that makes sense?
Well, I just think the market's really hot and everyone wants to jump in, and there seems to be a lot of small players coming into the space, and a lot of novel ideas, but how do you stand out? That's the question. So I would suggest that there's a lot of interest and growth in the space, and that's driving it. So I don't know. It's for sure the consumer demand is growing. I don't think it's growing at the same rate as number of new companies coming into the space, but it's the hottest category in the food business by far.
Yeah, I would second that. I think that there's a lot of the founders are obviously in large part product driven. So they're looking at a category that may have, 2 or 3 entrants, and they're saying, hey, I want to do something different. I don't want just the traditional nut milk. I'd like to see a 3 seed milk. So you're getting a lot of product uniqueness proliferation. I similarly feel that the marketplace isn't necessarily in alignment to the proliferation on the product side. So some of these novel ideas will likely fall out. But the overall category certainly is growing, in most cases double digit. But there is that ability that they have to demonstrate whether they can stand out and sustain themselves on shelf, maintain distribution, and have the kind of brand awareness that's necessary to keep it going over time.
Got it. Great. Well, it sounds like it is very innovation driven, which is a wonderful place to be, as well as there being a customer demand pulling through. This question is for you as a follow-up, Dror, although if anyone else has comments they'd like to make, they'd certainly be welcome to. Soul Cuisine does have its own brands. It has private labeling business. And it sounds like you maybe adjusted the balance between those over the years. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on in the private label space, what you're seeing, and if there were certain factors that led to you like rebalancing in favor of your own brands versus contract manufacturing, or what's been happening in the plant-based side with private labeling over the past couple of years?
Yeah, so we haven't done contract manufacturing for a few years because the demand's been so high, both for our own brand and for private label. All the retailers are interested in having their own brands. So those are what's nice about working with the retailers is there's immediate volume, and it's they're not going away. So there's a lot less risk for us as a manufacturer to partner with the retailer from our perspective. But so the demand, we've rebalanced a little bit away from contract manufacturing. Well, we've rebalanced away from contract manufacturing, at least in the immediate term, towards those other areas because there's just a lot of growth and it's less risky for us. It's less taxing on our business. We love partnering with innovation, but at the end of the day, we're a business too. So.
Yeah, makes sense. So next question is for you, Nicole. OSI is obviously quite famously partnered with Impossible and perhaps some other alternative protein or plant protein brands as a contract manufacturing partner in several different countries. So how has it been producing plant-based meat, considering that OSI does have this massive and well-established existing animal protein business? Have there been any lessons or challenges in integrating those two businesses and doing both simultaneously?
Yeah, we've actually find it's surprisingly complementary to our existing business to work in the plant-based space as well. For us, we have always been a company that's more focused on partnering to meet the needs of our partner and help them achieve their goals, and less on the specific product that our partner asks us to produce. So if our partner is asking us to produce a plant-based burger, that's great. We're happy to bring their vision to life and to grow their business for them and with them. If our partner is asking for a cheese sauce, we'll make that. If they're asking for salsa, we can do that. And if they're asking for a chicken nugget, we can do that. But for us, the really important thing is to understand our partner's vision. What are they trying to achieve? What matters to them? And then how can we help them make that leap? We're a manufacturer you work with when you're ready to have serious scale in your business and you need an ability to serve some of these global QSRs or global retailers. Our business was built to serve the needs of those kinds of outlets. And so we're able to help our partners make the leap from maybe a small upstart to something that's really ready to be available nationally or maybe even globally.
That's wonderful. Mark, I'm jumping over to you next. I know you've been working with a lot of different alternative protein companies, especially in the fermentation space. And one of the things you've been talking about over the years that we've been conversing has been the capacity bottleneck. And that applies, I think, both to self-operated as well as contract manufacturing capacity. So given the constraints we see in that space right now, I wonder if you could comment on how alternative protein startups should be approaching this. Do they all need to be planning on raising a bunch of money to build their own facilities? Is there a way that certain types of startups can take advantage of existing facilities, maybe from other sectors? Just wanted to broadly get your thoughts on on the contract and available capacity space. Oops, you're on mute, Mark.
Sorry about that. Thanks. As you mentioned, I've been publishing on this for a few years, and I wish I had turned out not to have forecasted correctly, but things are tough and they're getting tougher. The average fermentation CMO that companies are using today is about 35 years old, and it wasn't built to make food. So we've limped along, we've taken older facilities, and it's amazing what we've done with them. But what I like to tell companies, a build is an option, or using a contract manufacturer is an option. But if you need mid to large scale, in my world, hundreds of thousands to millions of liters of fermentation capacity, which for most precision food proteins is the scale and size, what I like to say is you have to have a plan for one of the two. You have to be in deep discussions currently with a contract manufacturer, because those are not relationships you sign up overnight. It's usually 6, 12, 18 months to get those stood up. Or same with building your own facility. You're talking 24 to 36 months. So my main message is, in either side, you need to feel a sense of urgency. And I think even for the investors, that's something they need to make sure that these companies are on the path to getting that commercial scale. My concern is less the technology risk and more, do we just have enough capacity to produce it?
Got it. I'm going to open that question up more broadly to our panelists, thinking about the plant-based side and cultivated along with fermentation. Are there similar bottlenecks for capacity? What do we do to address that? Is it an investment problem? Is it an alignment problem? Is it a market and demand problem? What's causing that? So that's open for anyone on the panel.
Zach, I'd like to comment to that. The plant-based space in large part has been driven, at least on the funding side and the VC side, by some of the unique technologies and the total addressable market that in many cases is very large. And then there's the retail and the branding side of the business, where people are excited about how it fits into a large potential of a large CPG portfolio. And some of the metrics that investors look at relative to those two columns versus a pure infrastructural investment that's providing the transformative technologies that are evolving, of course, those are different measurements. And I think the expectations that have come with a lot of the VC money, certainly in the branded and even in the technology arena, is that there's an exit and the multiples are large, but manufacturers basically are all about cash flow. And so you've got a significant fixed asset and overhead that you've got to maintain and deliver against. So I think some of the investment criteria may need to consider the reality of a manufacturing condition, which is very, very different than the other two.
Yeah, I just like to share this part of the world. So, even on the fermentation side, I do agree with Mark. A lot of the fermentation we have, especially in this part of the world, is built for beer. It's not really built for precision fermentation. And there are a lot of ethic facilities actually that and what we see a lot more and more often, I'm not sure, and it's open up to everyone else from other parts of the world, but we see a lot of these precision fermentation companies trying to do chemostat, so they're trying to do a continuous processing in that sense, and a lot of the facilities are just built for batch, right? So there is a huge and some of these then are impossible to redo, right? So there's a huge lack of this scale. But yeah, I do agree, cost is a big factor, right? I mean, stainless steel pricing has shot up in that sense. In Singapore, our construction costs due to COVID have increased by 30%. So there's just not sufficient. Even talk about welders itself, right? Skilled stainless steel welders to do orbital welding to make sure everything is closed, right? There's just not enough of that actually at the moment, and rightly or wrongly in that sense, everyone is busy building COVID vaccine plants, right? Which is great, of course, because we need vaccines and therapeutics and antibodies to end this pandemic. But it's taking. But everyone still needs to eat as well, right? On the same note, so there's really a lack of even fermentation facilities and capabilities as well. And a lot of these relationships, even on a cultivated meat side, take a very long time to build up as well. It's the same amount of time as well, and the same amount of expertise that is needed to really build up even a contract manufacturing relationship with our collaborators and partners, and also for them if they want to consider building their own. And yeah, so there's always there's a huge demand actually in both fronts that we see. Of course, then the next other thing as well for all of this is that in addition to demand, it'll be interesting to hear what are everyone's thoughts as well on how do we power these large plants, right? There are a lot of people trying to look at different renewable energy means in that sense, whether it's solar or wind in that sense. And I think all of these things need to go hand in hand, right? Larger facilities, but also how do we generate the electricity and power needed to power these facilities? It's still a big question that even ourselves, because we are vertically integrated and we're doing a bioengineering, not just a contract manufacturing actually, we are still trying to solve it and figure out how do we design and build these really factories of the future for both cultivated meat and precision fermentation.
Well, great. We're going to move on. There's a couple questions that have been coming in that I've seen from the audience, and aligns with some of the questions that I was thinking about earlier. Essentially this, what are the one, maybe two most important considerations for startups to keep in mind when they're thinking about working with a contract manufacturer and ensuring that it's a mutually beneficial relationship? So another way of looking at this is, what are you looking for as a contract manufacturer that you want to see in startups, and how can they be sure to make sure they're positioning themselves to, again, make sure it's as beneficial of a relationship as possible? That's a question for any of our panelists.
Simply, have they pressure tested their business model? I mean, have they actually attempted to put their proposed idea or product in front of people beyond friends and family? Do they have any sales record of people transacting a given amount of cash for an item? Surprisingly, many people don't have that data. They have a great idea, the product tastes great, but they haven't necessarily put any litmus test against the model as to whether it even works at a small scale.
And to kind of add to what Joe was saying, my comment was roughly the same as, what does success look like? Meaning, when they go in, are they being realistic? They'll all use the term contract manufacturer, but 3/4 of the time, it's really scale up they want. They want to come in, run for a couple months, make some product. It may be another year till they're back. That's great from the startup perspective. As Joe and the others were talking about cash flow and stuff, that's not great from the facility perspective. So it's kind of the risks and rewards and making sure you're really aligned so that the path you think you're on, it makes sense for both parties.
I would add that I would try and find a co-packer, a co-manufacturer that really has all the technology in-house, so they don't have to go. It reduces the risk for both sides. So if they're producing a similar product for somebody else, including like sort of the packaging style and everything, that makes it just a lot easier. It reduces everybody's stress. And I would also recommend for the brands to make sure that the product quality coming out of the co-man meets their standards, because it's got to be both sides. It needs to be easy to make, and it also needs to have the same results. If you are looking for something with a certain color or a certain spec and it works in your kitchen, but it doesn't work in manufacturing, you either need to change your aspirations or find somebody who can deliver what you've produced in your R&D situation.
All right. Anyone else want to add anything there? right. We're going to jump to a question from a member of the audience here from Liz Specht of GFI. Would love to hear from the panelists who own or build manufacturing facilities what the major bottlenecks they face when trying to bring new facilities online. Is it financing? Is it staffing, equipment, construction, lead times? Probably is some variation of all the above. So interested in how you think about balancing between those categories or ones that additional ones and what the biggest constraints are when we think about expanding capacity, contract capacity beyond where it is today.
I think it varies by technology, but in general, to build a new plant, you have to overcome technology risk and market risk. I believe in the last 5-10 years, we've seen a lot more movement on closing the gap on technology risk. I'm not saying they're not all there, but I think they're getting closer. What I found, and this is kind of a question of, things that I could have done better on companies I've worked at, it's, selling products, especially because I do fermentation where it's an ingredient, that's often an 18-month adoption cycle into, I want to make this protein that's going to go in a granola bar or something. That's not something a big CPG buys in 2 months. You have to give them tons of sample product, and it takes a while to get that. So I'm finding the offtake is often that binding offtake is a little more the concern these days than the technology side, but they're both definitely a concern.
Anyone else on the panel? Common challenges right now from expanding capacity, things that are the biggest constraints to overcome?
The other thing I would add, because Joe mentioned this earlier.
Yeah, it was mentioned.
No, I was just going to say, you mentioned earlier that people think I'm joking when I say this, manufacturers are used to returning on their capital. The venture group loves to take this high risk, high reward. You can't do that in a manufacturing environment. You're not going to all of a sudden make quadruple profits the next month. So I do think there's often a misunderstanding of the upside of existing manufacturing and that you're only going to make some level of return. So it's got to be much more certain of an investment than on the venture side. Sorry, Joe.
Yep. No, you're preaching to the choir on that one for sure. Yeah, I think the other reality is in the early stage of a product commercialization, when you think about a prospective client that comes into a facility and may not touch that facility, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 times, maybe 5 times in the first year, you've got a multi-million-dollar physical and human asset that's dynamic. And you're dropping in here and there over the course of time. That takes some doing to maintain and ensure that when you do show up, that we can actually execute to the standards and the global food safety needs that exist. And appreciation is certainly one feature of it, but continuity and ongoing operations have to be part of the formula for us to survive. I mean, it's just the nature of the way we're structured.
I think, Joe, you said that really well. I mean, we've all seen a factory stop producing a product for a month and then go back to producing it, and the first week is a disaster. I mean, in that short a period of time, the workforce gets out of the habit of making that particular product, and you do have real problems. It's important, I think, and probably everyone who's watching this knows this, but factories aren't like hotels. They're more like rental houses. You go in for the long term. You don't drop in and leave and drop in and leave. And factory owner is looking for a partner that is interested in that for them, because we sweat the asset. That's the number one rule of manufacturing. And if you sweat the asset, you have a profitable asset. If you don't, you don't. And that's that's the reality. So of course we want to help enable our partners, but we have to find a way to do that follows the rules of our industry.
All right. We're going to move on to one more audience question, then a quick closing lightning round here. So this question comes from Michael Camilleri in the plant-based arena, but I would expand this to others, the cultivated and fermentation stages as well, or segments. What stage of product readiness would it be best to get in touch with a co-man? So that's for any panelists.
I mean, I think you need to have a partner fairly early on, at least someone that, or a list of companies that you, as part of your business plan, you're obviously going to be raising money or making plans. So you need to have some idea of how you're going to make it. So if you've made the decision that you're going to contract manufacture, I would say that it should be part of the business plan. If you've decided that you're going to self-make manufacture until you've proven the commercial viability, then that's, you have some time. But obviously you can't go into business without knowing where you're going to make the product. So fairly early on, it should be part of the discussion with the investors and as you're writing the business plan and going there.
I would say
when I've worked with a couple startups that have engaged experienced consultants, and then the consultant offers them, the benefit of that expertise, and then acts as kind of an intermediary to us, so that they kind of manage those conversations and prevent creating bad impressions or prevent sort of anyone crossing anyone else off a list permanently. I think that's a really great way of managing those preliminary conversations, maybe before the product's ready. Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
No, I'm sorry I didn't mean to interrupt there, but I think really just understanding your business model and your business and knowing that you have a commercial sense, even on paper, of how this is going to work. And then obviously working back into the various elements of the supply chain, including the manufacturing element, which is critical. But I personally want to work with people that are going to be successful. And that's not just about the idea. It's about putting together the resources and being able to execute in a very, very competitive marketplace that is changing literally by the day. So do the research, dig in, and grind it out. I mean, that's the reality.
Absolutely. Well, appreciate those responses. This is going to be the final question, lightning rounds here. What are some of the common failure modes you've seen from brands who wanted to work with contract manufacturers? What are some of the the horror stories there that groups here should learn from, should try to avoid?
Unfortunately, in my world, the most common one is the process just not being developed to the point that they think it is. That I had a mentor once that you had the comment that you never skip the pilot scale. Some people just choose to do it in commercial equipment. And what you'll find is you add another 0 or 2 per month, per year, whatever, the larger scale you get. So, prove it before you get to large scale or you'll regret it.
I have seen some examples of sort of scattered contract manufacturer management processes. So occasionally you will see a partner where they don't have a particularly planned approach to who's going to manage and who's going to interface with that manufacturer. And that can turn off your manufacturer quite quickly. And you may find that they sour on your business and sour on the relationship because it's been too time consuming to manage the communication and too many conflicting instructions and things like that. So that kind of clarity in process, I think, is a good investment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think over communication is good, and make sure you have enough funds to execute the whole plan for longer than you think, because it takes a while to commercialize. And I think the advice around hiring a consultant to be the intermediary is a really good one.
Thanks, Joe. Anything from your side?
You know, we've touched on a lot of things here. You know, I go back to a few clear tenets for myself. Do they really understand their business? Do they understand pricing and costing? Do they know where their product's going to end up on the shelf? If they're selling a 4-ounce cup of plant-based butter at $9.99, is that really going to work? There's the whole financial dimension, I think, in many cases isn't really thought through, and how with a manufacturer you can work together at scaling to get to certain price points that are going to resonate in the marketplace. There's certainly a lot of novelty. I've had clients that have come in with, you know, hand applicated labels and unique jars and, you know, very beautiful artistic expressions on the shelf, but just have no sustainability dimension to them at all. And of course, there's a lot of personal ownership in some of these brands that founders come forth, and the market is going to wake you up pretty quick when you're out of sync with where the consumer is willing to go. And you need to be thinking about that before you're shipping, not after.
Absolutely. Excel, lastly to you, any common failure modes or horror stories from customers?
Well, I think I would say in general, not specific to customers. I'm just going to generalize it, right? You know, I think one of the things is like we seem to be asked in that sense on, can you achieve cost parity at what scale? And this is really not just $1 million question, but literally $1 billion question, right? If I could reach cost parity for you, I honestly don't think I'll be here in this room. It's I'm talking about cultivated meat space, right? I mean, it's really common in the precision fermentation space where you know for your strain, whether it's a Picaia strain or E. coli, you more or less know, you know, down to like pretty much, you know, by now in that sense. Of course, unless it's a novel strain, right? But you'll be able to give a price per kilogram, right? You know, so we are kind of like being tested in that sense. And you know, we are not economists at the end, right? You know, we can only provide you a certain costing based on really at best really a guesstimate, right? In that sense. So you know, we really need to start on the cultivated meat space. We are really starting at very, very small scale, and then only once we better understand all of these novel cell line characteristics and how they perform even in a small scale 2 to 10 liter bioreactor, then we will be able to do some kind of cost modeling for you in that sense for the larger scale up, right? So you know, we and you know, I can understand, of course, on the cultivated meat side for our clients and collaborators, they are asking that because their investors are asking them that, right? Because they so then you know it's like okay, so how soon can you get down to cost parity for our beef steak in that sense? And like, okay, if you project 5 years in a way, I'll give you X amount of dollars to do that, right? But I mean, you know, it's just, I mean, let's face it, right? That's why as I drew the analogy, it took CHO cells 34 years, right? It's going to probably take us that long as well for one cell line, right? In that sense. So, you know, I think this is more of the common thing in which we are really just at the beginning step in that sense of a very, very long journey. And, you know, we would need more time, especially in the cultivated meat side. And really a journey of 1,000 miles, you know, needs to begin with a single step, right? But similarly, our clients need to begin that single step and give us a small scale contract too, right? Otherwise, we can't make magic for you, right? In that sense, yeah.
I think that's as good a place as any to end up. Journey with 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and we can't make magic happen for you. So I want to give a big virtual round of applause to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your insights with us. And I know we went over a little bit, but I think it was absolutely worth it to keep the conversation going. Encourage you all to join us for the closing session next. And thank you very much for participating and engaging with us today. Have a good one.
Thanks, Zach. It's a pleasure.
you.